The party was loud, the kind of loud that gets into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I'd stepped outside to escape it, the clinking glasses, the shrill laughter, the countdown looming like a weight over the room. Midnight was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. I leaned against the railing of the balcony, the city spread out below me. Lights twinkled like stars trapped between the buildings, and the sound of distant fireworks echoed faintly in the cold air. I checked my watch. 11:58. 2 more minutes until another year started. 2 more minutes to make peace with the last one. But then I heard it. A low, grinding noise like metal dragging against stone. It came from behind me, where the big old clock sat in the center of the room. At first, I thought it was part of the party. Maybe someone had decided to wind the thing for dramatic effect. It was that kind of crowd. But the sound didn't stop. It got louder, deeper, like the clock was groaning under the weight of time itself. I stepped back inside, the warmth hitting me like a wall. No one else seemed to notice the sound. They were still laughing, still drinking, still counting down. 11:59. The hands of the clock were moving faster now, spinning wildly. The grinding noise grew louder, sharper, until it was all I could hear. "Hey, does anyone else?" I started, but the words caught in my throat. The room froze. I don't mean everyone stopped moving, like they noticed something. I mean they literally froze. Glasses hovered midair. Smiles hung on faces like masks. Even the bubbles in the champagne stopped rising. The only thing still moving was the clock. Its hands were spinning so fast they blurred, the grinding noise shifting into a deep, resonant hum. I felt it before I saw it, the pull. It wasn't like gravity. It was more like curiosity, but stronger. Like the clock wanted me to come closer. I didn't want to. But I stepped forward anyway. The air around the clock shimmered, a faint glow outlining its edges. It was old, too old for this place, with its sleek furniture and designer decor. The kind of old that felt deliberate, like it had been put here on purpose. As I got closer, the pull grew stronger. The hum of the clock filled my head, drowning out everything else. My hand reached out, shaking, drawn toward the glass face. And then it shattered. The sound of the glass shattering should have been deafening, but it wasn't. It was sharp, clean, and then silence. The room disappeared. I wasn't in the party anymore. I was standing in a dark, endless expanse, the broken clock floating in front of me. Its face was cracked, jagged pieces of glass hanging midair, the hands still spinning wildly. The grinding hum was gone, replaced by the steady, rhythmic tick, tick, tick of the clock. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. The pull wasn't just in my chest anymore, it was everywhere, like the clock had wrapped itself around me. "Who are you?" a voice asked. It wasn't loud, but it carried, cutting through the darkness like a blade. I turned, but I couldn't see anyone. "Who are you?" it asked again, closer this time. I don't know what's happening," I said. My voice felt small, swallowed by the void. The clock's hands slowed, jerking to a stop at 11:59. The ticking stopped too, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. "You touched it," the voice said. "You weren't supposed to touch it." "I didn't mean to," I said, spinning around, trying to find the source. "What is this place? What's happening?" The air shimmered, and then he was there, a tall figure, cloaked in shadows, with eyes that glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. "This is what happens," he said, his voice steady, calm. "Time fractures. It breaks. And now you're in it." "In what?" I demanded, my fear bubbling into frustration. "What do you mean in it?" "In the clock," he said simply, stepping closer. "You felt the pull. It brought you here. Now you're part of it." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't real. This can't be real. I was just at a party." "You were," he said. "And then you weren't. That's how it works." I looked at the shattered clock, its pieces still hanging in the air. "Why me?" The figure tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle. "Why anyone?" The clock doesn't choose. It needs. And it needed you. For what? I asked, my voice shaking. To fix it, he said. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. Fix what? Time, he said. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him this was insane, but the clock started ticking again. The hands moved backward this time, faster and faster, until they stopped at midnight, 12 o'clock. The world around me shifted, the darkness melting away. I wasn't in the void anymore. I was somewhere else. It looked like the same party, but it wasn't. The people were moving, but their motions were jerky, like puppets on tangled strings. Their laughter was hollow, looping in fragments that didn't quite match their expressions. This isn't real, I whispered. It's what's left, the figure said, his voice now behind me. Fragments of what was. Pieces of time that don't fit anymore. Why is this happening? I asked, spinning to face him. Because the clock broke, he said, his glowing eyes steady on mine. And now you have to fix it. How? He stepped closer, his hand reaching toward me. His fingers were long, skeletal, and in them was the clock's minute hand, now sharp and jagged, like a blade. You put it back together, he said, holding it out to me. I stared at the makeshift blade, my chest tightening. And if I don't? Then time stays broken, he said. Forever. I didn't take the blade at first. My hands stayed at my sides, trembling. You don't understand. I'm not someone who can fix this. I don't know how. The figure tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. You touched the clock. It chose you. That's all the qualification you need. That's insane, I said, my voice rising. This is insane. I didn't ask for this. No one does, he said, his tone calm, almost cold. But here you are. And here it is. He held the blade out closer, the jagged edge gleaming faintly in the dim light of the fractured room. Take it, or let time stay broken. The choice is yours. I wanted to scream at him, to demand more answers, but I could feel it, the pull, the same force that had dragged me to the clock in the first place. It was stronger now, almost unbearable, tugging me toward the shard in his hand. Slowly, reluctantly, I reached out. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and the moment I touched it, the world shifted again. The party vanished. I was back in the void, but it wasn't empty this time. Pieces of the clock floated around me, gears, springs, fragments of the shattered face. They hung in the air, turning slowly, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The figure stood behind me, silent, watching. What do I do? I asked, gripping the shard tightly. Put it back together, he said. How? You'll see. That wasn't the answer I wanted, but before I could argue, the shard in my hand began to pulse. The glow around it grew brighter, and I felt it pulling me forward, toward one of the floating gears. I reached out, the shard trembling in my hand, and the moment it touched the gear, there was a burst of light. The gear spun faster, clicking into place as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. Good, the figure said. I turned to him, my heart pounding. What happens if I get it wrong? You won't, he said simply. I didn't believe him, but I didn't have a choice. The shard pulled me toward another piece, a cracked sliver of the clock's face. I pressed the blade against it, and again, light flared as the piece snapped into place. One by one, I worked through the pieces. Each time I connected the shard to another fragment, the void seemed to brighten, the ticking of the clock growing louder, steadier. But with each piece, the shard in my hand grew heavier. My arm ached, my breath came in short gasps, and sweat dripped down my face. Why is this so hard? I asked, my voice strained. Because time is heavy, the figure said. You're carrying it now. Every second, every moment, every life. I wanted to drop the shard, to let it fall into the void and leave this nightmare behind. But I didn't. Something deep inside me, some stubborn, stupid part of myself, kept going. The final piece was the largest, the clock's central gear, its surface etched with intricate, ancient patterns. The shard in my hand was glowing brightly now, almost blinding, and as I pressed it to the gear, the light exploded, filling the void with a brilliant white. When the light faded, the clock stood before me, whole again. Its hands were moving, ticking forward, steady and sure. I collapsed to my knees, the shard clattering to the ground beside me. "It's done!" I whispered. The figure stepped forward, his glowing eyes fixed on the restored clock. "For now." "For now?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What do you mean, for now?" "The clock always breaks," he said. "Time is fragile. And someone always has to fix it." I stared at him, my chest tightening. No, I won't do this again." He didn't answer. Instead, he bent down and picked up the shard, holding it out to me. "You're part of it now," he said. "You'll always be part of it." I shook my head, backing away. "I can't." "You will," he said, his tone firm. "When the time comes, you will." And then he was gone. The void dissolved, and I found myself back at the party. The laughter, the cheers, the clinking glasses, it all came rushing back, like nothing had happened. But I could feel it, the weight of the clock still pressing against me. The clock was fixed. Time was moving. But I knew it wouldn't last. I stood there, frozen, the sound of laughter and celebration washing over me like static. People clinked their glasses, the fireworks outside painted the sky in bursts of color, and the countdown replayed on the television. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. The weight in my chest didn't fade. I could feel it, the pull, faint but constant. The shard wasn't in my hand anymore, but it was still there, somewhere, tethering me to the clock. "Hey! Where've you been?" a voice called out. It was Nick, one of the hosts, his grin wide, his tie loosened around his neck. "You missed the toast. Come on, we're doing shots." I forced a smile, shaking my head. "Not tonight. I need some air." He waved me off, already distracted by someone else. I slipped past the crowd and out onto the balcony. The cold air hit me hard, but it wasn't enough to clear my head. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the city. The fireworks were still going, their echoes bouncing off the buildings. I reached into my pocket, not expecting to find anything, but there it was, a small, cold piece of metal. The shard. I pulled it out, holding it up to the light. It was smaller now, almost like a key, its jagged edges smoothed out. It didn't glow anymore, but it felt alive in my hand, pulsing faintly. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, my breath fogging in the air. The shard didn't answer. Behind me, the party continued, the sounds of laughter and music muffled by the glass door. I turned the shard over in my hand, its surface catching the faint light of the fireworks. I wanted to throw it, to hurl it into the night and be done with it. But I couldn't. The pull was stronger now, like the shard was anchoring me to something I couldn't see. I closed my hand around it, my knuckles white, and leaned back against the railing. The city felt different now, sharper, like the edges of reality had been sanded down to something raw. Every light in every window seemed brighter, every sound clearer. I could feel the passage of time in a way I never had before, each second ticking by, steady and unstoppable. And then I heard it. A low, grinding noise, distant but unmistakable. The sound of gears turning, of metal dragging against metal. I looked down at the shard in my hand, its faint pulse quickening. It wasn't over. The clock was moving, but it wasn't done. Time was still fragile, still fractured. And I was still tied to it. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the shard, listening to the faint hum of the clock in the distance. All I knew was this. The next time it broke, I'd be the one to fix it. The weeks that followed felt normal, or at least close to it. I went through the motions, waking up, working, talking to friends, but the weight of the shard never left me. It stayed in my pocket, cool against my skin, pulsing faintly like it had a heartbeat of its own. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was over. The clock was fixed, time was moving, and whatever I'd gone through was behind me. But the pull didn't stop. It was subtle at first, a nagging sensation at the edge of my thoughts. I'd catch myself staring at clocks, feeling their ticking resonate deep in my chest. Every hour felt heavier, every passing moment sharper. And then the visions started. They came at random, brief flashes of things that didn't belong. A shattered clock face. A fragment of gears floating in the void. Faces I didn't recognize, frozen in time like the partygoers that night. The first time it happened, I was in line at a coffee shop. One moment I was staring at the menu board, and the next I was somewhere else, standing in the dark expanse of the void, the clock looming above me. The vision lasted only a second, but it left me shaking. By the third time, I knew it wasn't going away. I started walking at night. The city felt quieter then, the streets empty, the ticking of distant clocks the only sound. I didn't know what I was looking for, but the pull seemed stronger when I moved. One night, I ended up in front of an old, abandoned building. Its windows were dark, its walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. The pull was strongest here, like the shard in my pocket was vibrating against my leg. I hesitated, but only for a moment. The door creaked open under my hand, the sound echoing through the empty halls. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the scent of dust and mildew. I didn't need to see to know where to go. My feet moved on their own, carrying me through the darkness, deeper into the building. The pull guided me to a staircase, its steps groaning under my weight. At the top, a single door stood ajar, faint light spilling out from the crack. I pushed it open, and there it was. The clock. It wasn't like the one at the party. This one was smaller, less ornate, its face cracked and tarnished. But I recognized it immediately. It was broken. The hands were stuck at midnight, the gears behind the face grinding against each other with a sound that set my teeth on edge. The ticking was uneven, wrong, like it was struggling to move but couldn't. I stepped closer, the shard in my pocket practically burning now. "You're back," a voice said, low and tired. I spun around, my heart pounding. It was him, the figure from before. Only now, he looked different. Smaller. Faded. Like a shadow stretched too thin. "I told you it wouldn't last," he said, his glowing eyes dim. "Time always breaks." I clenched my fists. "Why? Why does this keep happening?" "Because that's what time does," he said. "It moves, it breaks, and someone has to fix it." "Then why me?" I demanded. "Why not someone else?" He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Because you can hear it. The ticking. The pull. That makes you the keeper." I didn't want to believe him. But I couldn't deny the truth. The shard in my pocket, the visions, the pull, they weren't going away. The figure gestured toward the broken clock. "It's time." I stared at it, my chest tightening. The thought of fixing it again, of going back to that void, made my stomach churn. But I couldn't walk away. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the shard. It was glowing faintly now, its light casting long shadows across the room. As I stepped forward, the figure's voice followed me. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Time is fragile. It will keep breaking. And you will keep fixing it." I pressed the shard to the clock, and the world shattered around me. The moment the shard touched the clock, the world fractured again. I braced for the void, for the cold weight of nothingness. But this time, it wasn't dark. It was bright. Too bright. I was standing in the middle of a city, but not the one I'd left behind. The buildings were taller, impossibly so, stretching into the sky like needles. The streets were empty, but I could feel movement all around me, a faint hum, like the city itself was alive. And the clocks. They were everywhere. Huge, towering clocks hung from every building, their faces glowing faintly in the artificial light. Their hands moved in perfect unison, ticking forward with a precision that felt unnatural. I reached for the shard, but it wasn't in my pocket anymore. My hands were empty. "You're in it now," the voice said. I turned, and there he was, the figure, more solid than before, his form sharper, his eyes burning brighter. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling. The future, he said simply. One of them. One of them? He nodded. Every time the clock breaks, it splinters. Time fractures, and pieces of it bleed into each other. What you're seeing is the result of those fractures. I looked around, the weight of his words sinking in. This isn't supposed to happen. No, he said. But it does. And it will keep happening. Why? If I'm fixing the clock, why does it keep breaking? Because you're not fixing it, he said, stepping closer. You're holding it together. For now. But time is fragile, and you can't hold it forever. I backed away, shaking my head. No. No, there has to be a way to fix this. To fix everything. There isn't, he said. Not for you. His words hit me like a blow. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but deep down, I knew he was right. I could feel it. The pull growing stronger, the weight pressing harder. Every second I held the clock together, it fought against me, straining to shatter again. What happens when I can't hold it anymore? I asked. He tilted his head, studying me. Then it ends. Ends? Everything, he said. Time collapses. The fractures consume each other, and all of it, past, present, future, ceases to exist. I stared at him, the enormity of his words settling over me like a suffocating blanket. Unless, he said, his voice trailing off. Unless what? He hesitated, his glowing eyes dimming slightly. Unless you let go. Step out of the loop. Let someone else take your place. How? I asked, my voice cracking. How do I do that? He reached into the air, and a shard appeared in his hand, longer this time, sharper, its edges glinting like broken glass. Take this, he said, holding it out to me, and give it to someone else. I stared at the shard, my hands trembling. You want me to trap someone else in this? It's the only way, he said. The clock needs a keeper. If you don't pass it on, it'll collapse. And so will everything else. I couldn't move. The shard seemed to pulse faintly, its light reflecting in his glowing eyes. Who? I asked finally. Who do I give it to? He smiled faintly, the expression cold and distant. Anyone. The clock doesn't choose. It only needs. I took the shard, the cold metal biting into my palm. The city around me flickered, the glowing clocks stuttering in their movement. I could feel the fractures growing, the weight pressing harder. I had to decide. I closed my eyes, the shard heavy in my hand. Faces flashed in my mind, friends, strangers, people I'd passed on the street. Any of them could take my place. Any of them could carry the burden. But could I do it? Could I trap someone else in this nightmare to save everything else? The pull grew stronger, the clocks ticking louder, the fractures widening. And then I let go. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the balcony. The city stretched out before me, fireworks still bursting in the sky. The shard was gone. For the first time in weeks, the weight was gone too. But I knew it wasn't over. Somewhere out there, someone else was holding the clock together, carrying the weight I couldn't. I don't know who they are. I don't know how long they'll last. All I know is, one day, the clock will break again. And when it does, I'll hear the ticking. And I'll remember.